All right, so tonight we are going to look at advanced detailing and view management. And so one of the things that I like to walk people through when they take this course is just to talk about how they're going to organize their own library of Revit content back in their offices. I was going to mention it last week, but I forgot to do so. So when you're working in Revit and you go to insert a family, now Revit shows you its own category of families in either the imperial or the metric folder. Now, you have to be kind of careful when you're installing Revit that during the install process, when you choose the content that you're going to install, that you choose both the metric and the imperial content, because the developers think that because we're in Canada, we only do things in metric, and as you folks know, that's not the case. So we do things in both units quite frequently. So that's just something to keep in mind when Revit's being installed. So once you start using Revit, you're going to be making your own families and downloading them from the different websites that are out there. So BIMobject.com is probably the best one that I can think of. BIMobject.com. There's Revit City. You have to be careful with some of the content from Revit City. It's not so high quality. But BIMobject.com is good, and some of the manufacturers provide their own stuff for you to use, like Steelcase and some of the other furniture suppliers. They make Revit families that you can download. So you're going to have the out-of-the-box library, as we call it. Plus, you folks need to develop your own library that you maintain as time goes on. Now, what you don't want to do, you don't want to store any new families that you get in Revit's library. Okay, so this, it's hard to see, but up at the top there you can see the path to where Revit stores its content on your computer. C:/program data /Autodesk /RVT 2020 /libraries /US Imperial. It's a big long path to get to this folder where Revit stores all its content for the 2020 product here. You don't want to store your stuff in here. Because as soon as you folks move to Revit 2021 and you stop using Revit 2020, these folders are essentially useless for you. So don't put your stuff into these folders. So what I would propose is that you just leave the out-of-the-box libraries as is, and then you folks need to create and then curate your own Revit library. So you need to have a folder, and I tend to use the same structure that Autodesk has provided, and so I have folders for annotations. So I've got firms that I work for, they have their own folder on their server with their own stuff. So all of the different graphics that their offices use. So everything from annotations down to folders for doors, and maybe they got folders for interior and exterior doors, and then right down to, you know, windows. So what's going to happen is when you download a family off the internet and you're, you know, happy with it, and you're going to use it on the current project, and you're going to use it in future projects, well, you go and grab that new window that you've just got, and you throw it in the Windows folder, and it's there, you know, for as long as you are using Revit. So you're going to start populating all of these folders under your own Revit content folder with things that you're going to use. Now the path to this is up to you. I put this right off the root of my C drive. If you're a sole practitioner, sometimes people will put it in their My Documents folder, in your Documents folder under Windows. Windows tries to sort of get you thinking about using Windows' own way of storing things. When you open up your computer, and up at the top there typically will be, you know, a shortcut to the Documents folder for your user account. Now I find all that babysitting by Microsoft annoying, so you can see I don't even have a My Documents folder listed at the top. So I have a folder right off the root of my C drive where I put my Revit content. So that's right off my C drive. So I just open up my C drive and there it is. So Microsoft can go pound sand, I can organize my hard drive just fine, thank you, and I work right off the root directory and go from there. So I've got my own Revit folder there, inside which I've got all the different families, all the different categories of families that I use. So there's all my categories of families, and also I have digital pictures of brick and stone for doing rendering, and hatch files, and a bunch of other stuff. So all of these folders here, I've used these to you know, store my own families over the, you know, the years that I've been using Revit, and I'm more or less replicating Revit's own folder structure for storing families. Now, in the mix, and this is what we're going to be talking about tonight, we're talking about detail items. I'll do this in kind of boldface here. So if you go and look in the detail items folder where all the 2D stuff is stored for doing detailing in Revit, what Autodesk tends to do is to use the master format numbers to organize the subfolders under detail items. So if I'm on the Annotate tab here, and I use the component tool on the Annotate tab, which will prompt you to put in a 2D object that you'd use in a detailing process. And if I go to the Load Family dialog box, so here's the detail items folder with the out-of-the-box content. It shows all the different master format sections, and you go through those folders, find a 2D family that you want to use for your detailing work, and insert it into your project. Now I haven't followed the master format spec for my detail items folder, but I do have one. So what I've done is I've sort of tended to put subfolders in here for things like wood frame, steel, waterproofing, concrete. So instead of following the master format format stuff, which I don't work with modular format too terribly often, but I know it's going to be in that folder when it comes to doing detail. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at tonight here is to deal with insulation. And in particular, rigid insulation. So when I first started using Revit, I was looking for their rigid insulation tool. I don't know what you folks use for a graphic, but this is the one that all the firms that I've worked at have tended to use. It's got these lines that sort of cross by each other, and this is kind of the typical graphic for rigid insulation. Revit's family for this, it looks like plasticore. It's got these, right, this is kind of the graphic, but it's got these diagonal lines going back and forth. It doesn't look like the rigid insulation that I would want to use at all. So I was like, oh, okay, I need to build something that'll let me detail this and put it in my library of detail items here under insulation so I can use it in future. So we're going to look at how we're going to build this rigid insulation family tonight. Now, if we look at the graphics, we can see that obviously there's some components of this that repeat. Right? So if we look at the design of this thing, you know, stalagmites or stalactites, whatever they're called. So this part here is graphically what's repeating as we draw this thing across the screen. So we've been talking about these line-based families for the last week or two. And so what we want to do is to be able to provide something that when you draw 2 points on the screen, it will fill from the first click to the second click exactly with the amount of rigid insulation that's needed to get exactly from click 1 to click 2. Now, we talked a little bit about these line-based components. We talked about something like a parking stall 2-pick family, where if you've got a 9-foot wide parking stall, you want a bunch more exactly 9-foot parking stalls arrayed across the screen as you go from click number 1 to click number 2. Now, we don't really care about our parking stalls ending right at our second click. That's not the point. The point is we want as many 9-foot stalls as we can get for the length of line that we draw across the screen. But with our rigid insulation, we want that rigid insulation to exactly get from point 1 to point 2, because if we're drawing, say, a foundation wall, and we want to insulate from the top of the slab to the top of the wall, you know, we want to completely fill that space between those 2 clicks with rigid insulation. So we want our insulation to kind of stretch a little bit as we draw it, unlike our parking stalls where it's just 9-foot increments and that's all. So we're going to be building a line-based detail component. So instead of a 2D thing, or a 3D thing, this is a 2D family. And once this is built, you folks can put this into your own library of Revit content wherever you happen to be storing it, on your computer back in your office. Okay, so if you folks want to go into our session 8 folder for tonight, I'm just going to go and copy that here. So I'm going to copy from the share out folder for BLDG. So inside this folder, we have a few different two-pick components. So these are line-based detail components. Now, first of all here, let's show you folks where these things start their lives. So if you go to the File tab and you hover over New and you choose Family, it's the detail item line based. That's the family template we're working with tonight. So again, two-pick template, pick 2 points on the screen, and you can use the distance between those 2 points to create a family whose size varies based on the length of line that you draw on the screen. Now let's look at some of these families and what they do. Okay, so here I'm going to look at this Shingles two-pick family and show you what this does. So to zoom in here, so for detailing purposes, if you draw this across your screen, what Revit does is it creates a bunch of shingles that overlap. So there's parameters in here that control the amount of offset between them, what the length of each one of these shingles is. So for detailing purposes, if you're doing a wall detail and you want to show that you've actually got shingles on there, this thing will allow you to draw those in real quick. So instead of having to draw those lines and go ziggy-zaggy across your screen, just grab this thing and you're good to go. Now, here's another two-pick family. This one's for showing plywood in a detail. So if you draw a line across your screen here, it does this. Let me just change the scale. It does this different kind of hatch for plywood. So Revit's plywood detail component here, let's just show you folks what it looks like. So I'm going to insert and then load family here, and I'm going to go to the Imperial Library and bring in the, where is it here? Wood, Division 6. Sheathing. Plywood section, here we go. Okay, so that's what Revit's plywood detail looks like, the plywood detail component. And again, this wasn't how I was taught to draw plywood here at BCIT all those years ago. So I wanted this particular graphic, which is how Frank Ching and his architectural graphics, that's what he has for his graphic. And so I've made a two-pick family that as you draw this thing across your screen, you can see that, of course, it stretches, and it also varies the numbers of those little graphics there. Those sort of two hash marks that you see here and here and here. Revit figures out how many of those things should be drawn on the screen as you drag it across the drawing area. Another one here. This is a two-pick family, and this one, this would be used for detailing purposes when you're doing a sloping deck. So if it's a wood frame deck, these are for doing sleepers, and this allows you to draw the sleepers at different heights, right? So it's still 1.5 inches wide, and you can see that it has the single slash if this is for blocking purposes, or if I don't want it to be blocking, you folks can see that there's a checkbox in the properties palette so that I can say that this is not blocking, and it is in fact a continuous member, and it's given the X graphic which indicates that this is a continuous member. So these are both two-pick families. One of them does an array, so the plywood does an array of the shingles. The plywood does an array of this hash mark in the middle. And the blocking family doesn't do an array, it just dynamically changes the length of the lines inside the family so that you can make this thing as long as you want it to be. Now, all that said, in the Session 8 folder, we're going to work with this rigid insulation unit. So this thing that you see right here, this is the starting family that is going to be arrayed when we make our own detailed component family, line-based detailed component, that takes this family, it's nested in, and then this thing is going to be arrayed. So we're going to build an array using this little block. And as you draw the line across your screen, you're going to get as many of these things as you need. So, what I'm going to get you folks to do is to close all of your projects down so that the only thing that you have open is this rigid insulation unit that you will find in the Session 8 folder. So if you want to go ahead and just go find that thing in the Session 8 folder, even if it says it's in use or somebody else has got it open, that's fine. Go ahead and open up the rigid insulation unit family. And then we'll be ready to go. So we're now into the first page of our notes. Now, this family, in some respects, you could say that it is in competition with, in terms of what we're using it for, with the repeating detail. Now, in the context of a project, you folks know that on the Annotate tab, there is a repeating detail component. So here's the repeating detail component. So what the repeating detail component does, it takes a detail component that's already loaded. So if you don't have the detail component loaded, you can't do what you got to do. So if I was going to do a rigid insulation detailing with the repeating detail component, this is how I do it. So watch on the screen, I'll go through the process. So what I do is I go and grab my rigid insulation family here, and I'll load this into the project. So here's one of these little rigid insulation guys here, right? So this thing is, I think it's 4 inches thick. Somewhere in here, yep, 4 inches thick, so it's 4 inches long, 4 inches in each direction. 4 inches thick rigid insulation. So on the Annotate tab, I can grab now, because I've already loaded that detail component in, I can start with the out-of-the-box repeating detail component, which is brick. So here's the out-of-the-box repeating detail component that you folks get in an architectural project. It repeats bricks every 2 5/8 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'll call this rigid. Again, don't you folks do this, because this is actually, I'm going to show how this sucks. So there's my rigid insulation, and it's going to go every 4 inches. And I don't know if it needs to be rotated yet, so we'll see here. Yep, needs to be rotated. So you can see it's, the little blocks need to be rotated one direction. So detail rotation, I'll try 90 degrees. There we go. So that's pretty good, hey? Except for, look at what happens. I have to go the full 4 inches, and then I get another block. So what happens if I'm detailing my foundation with this thing? So this is using the repeating detail command. So I'm doing my rigid insulation along my foundation wall here, but it doesn't quite get to the top of my wall because it only wants to go in increments of exactly 4 inches. Kind of limited. And the other problem with repeating detail components is that this thing, you can't save it in your library. You want to save a repeating detail component into your detail items folder? Nope. These things live in your project. So if you want to use this repeating detail in a new project, well, what do you got to do? Select it, Control-C, copy it, flip over to the other project, paste it in. So you got to copy and paste it between your projects. Bit of a hassle. So it's a fail on part 1 here because it doesn't stretch to fill this entire zone from the top of my footing to the top of the wall unless that distance is an exact increment of the little block that was used to create that repeating detail. So that's one problem. Problem number 2 is I can't just go and grab it out of my library and use it. I got to go find the project that it was created in, copy it, and then paste it into my current project. So it's not great. So this is why we're going to make a repeating detail. We're going to improve on it by using the line-based families. So here we go. So if you folks have just the rigid insulation unit family open, we're going to go through the process of creating this. Exercise, creating a 2-pick detail component. Now, in step 2, notice the parameters and the graphics of this file. So we're going to go up to family types here. So, in here you can see that it's 4 inches in width. That's our width of the insulation. There's this parameter called line length here, and what the line length parameter does is it controls how long these crossover lines are here. So when I was looking at making this family, I found that if they cross over by about 62.5%, graphically that seemed to look about right. I mean, if it was 60%, I'm sure that would be fine too. So this thing is going to repeat. Now you can see we've got some parameters here for the length of the block plus the half length, so that these lines are always at the half points of our little rigid insulation block that's going to get arrayed. So what we're going to do to make this work is we are going to fine adjust the length of this block. So let's get started on this. So first of all, if you folks want to go to the File tab and hover over New, so without clicking, just hover over New and choose Family. And in the list of templates, choose Detail Item Line Based. Detail Item Line Based, and hit Open. So this is the 2-pick detail component template. So this represents the first click that the person makes when they're using this thing. And this represents the second click. So we've got a 4-foot distance between the start and end points of this family. Just here, while we're working on it in the template, of course, we can play with the length parameter to make it longer or shorter. to suit the needs of whatever it is that we're building. So, now that we've got this family, this new family created, we're going to go back to the other tab, and we're going to nest this into that newly created template. So, with the little block unit family in the foreground, choose Load into Project, and this will nest this family in here into our other project. And I'm going to place one copy of it like so. Just the one. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to place this little block into our family here. So first what we need to do is align the left and bottom edges so it's in the corner. So watch on the screen here, I'll go through the process. Here's the align command. So I believe it's AL is the keyboard shortcut. I'm not sure. You could hold your cursor over it and it'll tell you what, it might be different for you folks. So there's align. So I'm going to pick the left reference plane here. And then I'm going to pick the left of my little block and move it into place. And now I'm going to put my cursor here on the line here at the bottom. Click that and lock the bottom of the block into place so that its bottom and its left-hand side are placed and aligned as you see on my screen. So I'm done with the align command now. So I've hit escape to get out of it, and when I click on the block that I just placed, you can see the two padlocks on there to let you know that its left edge and its bottom edge have been aligned as shown on the screen. Now, we are on to page 2 of the notes. So we've done page 4, or step 4 rather, on page 2. We're on to step 5. So we're going to create an array. Now, this is going to be a second type array. And the reason that we're making this a second type array, oh, you need a copy of the notes, don't you? Okay, just a moment here. Are there any extra copies of the notes here? Yeah, an extra copy? Okay, great. Anybody else need a copy of the notes? Okay, great. Okay, so once you've got this thing aligned into place, we're going to go grab the array command. So select it so that we can start the array. Select our block that's been locked into place. Grab the array command. And as I said, this is going to be a second rather than a last type array, because we're going to fine tune the length of the block precisely so it fits in between our start and final click point. So, oh, I got ahead of myself. I'll come back and do the back end of step 5 in a second. Okay, so we're going to click our little unit here and just place it like so. So we've got our second member of the array. And then it says make the label of the array num units. So to make this array parametric, you click the graphic connector between the members of the array, so just that little U-shaped thing here. So not the number, but the line underneath the number of objects in the array. Just click it. And you'll see we've got a label drop down here at the top. And we're going to switch and choose add parameter. And it says here number of units, num units. Now, one thing we need to change here, does anybody have a sense of what that is? Yeah, so I heard something there? Yeah, it's got to be an instance parameter, that's right. Because there's going to be a different number of these blocks every time we use this thing. So each time we insert this family, there's going to be a different number of rigid insulation blocks. So it does have to be an instance parameter, so we can hit OK. Now we need to go back here, because I forgot to finish the second half of step 5. Now, if we double click one of our rigid insulation blocks, so we can edit its properties, what we want to do is create some linking parameters so that when this thing is loaded into the project, people will be able to control the thickness of the insulation. And also we need to fine tune the length of each one of these blocks so it'll exactly fit. This array of blocks will exactly fit between the user's first and second clicks on their screen. So double click on the group, on the array group, so you can select the block, and then go up to edit type. And we need to make some linking parameters here. So down at the bottom here, you'll find all the length parameters of this little rigid unit. Find the width parameter, which should be 4 inches. Go all the way over to the little gray box on the right-hand side and click it. So we're going to make a new parameter that's linked to the width parameter inside the rigid unit. So let me just repeat here. So you've arrayed the 2 blocks, double click on one of them, doesn't matter which one. And once you're inside the array group, select the block, so it'll turn blue, and over on the properties palette, find edit type. Inside this dialog box, scroll on down to the bottom and find the width parameter, and go way over to the right-hand side and click the little box. So now we're creating a parameter inside this blank template family here that's going to control the width of our insulation. This is going to, basically it's going to be a new parameter which we're calling insulation thickness. Insulation thickness. Now this one will be a type parameter because let's say that you specify 2-inch thick insulation. Well, for all your 2-inch thick rigid insulation, they're all going to be the same thickness. So that is a type parameter. So go ahead and hit OK. And hit OK. So now the width of this little block of insulation, it's being controlled by the parent family, which means that in a project we can control the width by using this parameter called insulation thickness. Now, the length of this block, we're going to be able to fine-tune this parameter when it's arrayed. So same thing, go over to the right-hand side, hit the little gray box, and we're going to make a new parameter called actual unit length. Actual unit length. Now, this is going to be an instance parameter, and it's going to be driven by a formula. We're going to have a formula that figures out exactly how long those little rigid units need to be to fit between our 2 clicks on the screen, which means the person who's using this family in your projects, they can't alter this parameter. It's a formula. It's going to be formula driven. So there's no point in showing it in the dimensions section of the family. Let's bury it right down at the bottom of the dialog box. Put it in the other group. And in a few seconds, we'll see why we want to do this. So actual unit length, it's an instance parameter, and we're going to group it under other. Hit OK, hit OK. And that's it. That's all we need to do. Hit OK. And we're in the middle of this editing an array group, so we'll finish that as well. Now, once we are back looking at the family here, go up to family types again. So these two parameters here that are under this other group, we're kind of hoping that the users in a project aren't going to pay any attention to these. They're going to be grayed out once you load it into a project anyway, because we're going to have formulas that control them. So the number of units. So we got to think about how this thing is going to work. Okay, here's the deal. We've got to get from A to B. We've got our little block in here, and we're going to array this thing as many times as is needed to get us to B. So we've got to get from A to B. Now, we've got our width, which represents the insulation thickness. Now, as a starting point, we say that the length is kind of similar to the width. This little block here that's getting repeating is roughly square. So if the distance from A to B is represented by the length parameter, and of course that's exactly what it is, how many of these blocks do we need to get from A to B? Well, the number of units, which we just made up, that parameter for controlling the number of objects in the array, equals the length divided by the insulation thickness. So if our insulation thickness is 4 inches and our length equals 47 inches, well, we need roughly 12 of those blocks, right, ish. We need about 12 blocks at 4 inches thick insulation to get us from A to B. But obviously, the length has to change. So here's what we do. We get the actual unit length, and remember we've made this parameter up already, actual unit length. How do we get this? Well, we've got everything that we need. We take the length, you know, the distance between those two clicks, and we simply divide it by the number of units that we said that we needed. So in this case, it would be 47 inches divided by 12. And that's going to equal some ugly number. But we don't care. Because what we do care about is that we get exactly from A to B filled up with these rigid blocks. And of course, it has to be an integral or a discrete number of blocks. We can't have 1.5 of these blocks. We have to have either, 11 or exactly 12 or exactly 13. It's the length of these individual blocks that we can adjust to suit the needs of what we're drafting. So here, I'll just kind of keep that up on the screen here, and we're going to go back into family types, and make these parameters happen with the formulas. All right. So we've got our insulation thickness here. So our actual unit length, we need to get this figured out here. So number of units equals the length, and this is case sensitive, divided by case sensitive insulation thickness. Good, you can see it on the screen there. So our number of units, that's our first step, equals the length, 2 clicks on the screen, divided by the insulation thickness. So that should give us 12, and it does. So, what happens if I take length now, the 2 clicks that someone makes on the screen, and I make it 47 inches? I can test it right now. I still need 12 blocks. So even if the distance between the 2 clicks that the person puts on the screen is 3'11", we still need 12 blocks. But our actual unit length is going to be length divided by, and again, case sensitive, num units. So now, if you folks can see, our actual unit length, 3 and 235, 256 of an inch. So Revit is fine-tuning our actual unit length in these rigid insulation blocks to squish them into place. So if we go back and change length to 4 feet, our actual unit length will go to exactly 4 inches. Now, I'm just going to leave it like this. Go ahead and hit OK. Once you've got the parameters in, if you need a hand with getting those parameters sorted, just wave at me here, and I'll help you out. So now you can see that we've got all our blocks created. They're just not in the right place. So we just need to use the align command a couple of times to get these blocks into ship shape. So let's do it. So this is a second type array. So the critical thing is setting up our distances between the first block and second block in the array. So here we go, grab the align command. And so what we want to do is grab the right edge of the first object in the array. Pick that first. Then the second click will be the left side of the second object. And then lock it into place. Don't worry about this message, just hit OK. Okay, and obviously the next thing that we need to do is pick the top edge of our first block and then the top edge of the second block and lock it. And again, ignore the message. So now you can see it exactly fits. Let's confirm it. Make some totally random number here. 4 foot, 5.25, enter. So there you go. It stretched everything. My rigid insulation is going exactly from one end to the other. Mission accomplished. Now, one more thing that we need to do here, we should save this family so that we're good to go. So I'm going to save this on my desktop. And I think it suggests we call it rigid insulation 2-pick. Rigid insulation 2-pick. Great. Now there's one more thing that we need to do, and I'll demonstrate that, and then we'll take a break for 10 minutes for coffee and we'll carry on. Right at, I'll try and end well before 9 o'clock. We've got our open book quiz for today. It's on the BCIT Learn website, Again, you'll have 2 opportunities to do it. One tonight, and then another attempt sometime during the week when it suits you, and we'll just take the highest of either of those attempts. Okay.
The quiz said that it was open until June 10th, 2018.
I haven't opened it yet.
Okay, so you
Yeah, yeah, I'll flip the switch at the break. Okay, so let's look at using this thing in the context of a project. So if you folks want to just type in Control N to start a new project, Control N to start a new project, and then switch to the architectural template, Control N, switch to the architectural template and hit OK. So here we've got, you know, a new project open, and I'm going to zoom in on one of these elevation tags here just for scale. And we're going to use that new rigid insulation family. So switch tabs to go back to it. Now let's load it into the project. So we're going to load it into this new project that we're working on right now. So whatever is the project name for the new project you just started seconds ago. So here's our rigid insulation, and it's working like a charm. Now, do you guys know when you're placing a wall that you can hit the space bar to flip it one direction or the other? So let's say that you're going up the a foundation wall, and you realize that as you're drawing it right now that the insulation is actually burying itself into the concrete. So you're like, no problem, I'll hit the space bar. Except space bar is not doing anything. And here's why. So if you folks want to just place your detail component, we're going to go back and show you how to give it that space bar flippable functionality. Okay, so back to the family. On the Create tab inside your family, you will find the Control command. This adds a control to your family. So if you folks have ever clicked on a door, and of course you have, you've seen the double arrows that allow you to flip the handing and the facing of the door. So we're going to do that here. The control that we need is a double vertical. And so with this double vertical, just put it on the top side of the family. You only need one for it to work. You could put more in, but there'd be no point. So just by having put this one control in, your family will now flip as many times as you want. Now, what are all these other controls? Well, if you put in a double horizontal, it would also flip directions, which probably doesn't make much sense. So the double vertical does what we want. Well, what does a single vertical do? It allows you to hit the space bar once. So it would flip it one time, and then it would die. So I don't even know what that's used for. So anyway, it's the double vertical that you want. So you can save that, again, Control S. And when we load this back into the project and overwrite the block that we have there now, this block now, you'll see that the double arrow is now appearing. We've redefined the family. And if we hit the space bar now, it flips it, whereas that was not available before. So that takes us to the end of page 2. So you folks need to share this into your assignments folder on the iDrive before the end of the night. All right, let's take a 10-minute break.